It began with Harvey Weinstein and hasn't stopped since. A wave of sexual harassment allegations is taking down actors, comedians, CEOs, coaches, journalists, and politicians.
And I am therefore resigning as Defense Secretary.
The claims are shattering a conspiracy of silence and shaming men accused of abusing their power. A global chorus of emboldened men and women have spoken out about their own stories, using the social media hashtag #MeToo to expose the magnitude of the problem.
Yo también he sido abusada sexualmente.
We all went out to a club.
Ich habe gesagt, nein, ich will das nicht. Ich habe mehrmals Nein gesagt.
And then he was like, do you want to go drive somewhere dark where no one will see us?
But while it's being celebrated as a moment of social reckoning, what real change will it actually bring?
We have to get, everyone on board with this, or we're not going to change the culture.
The Oxford Dictionary defines sexual harassment as involving the making of unwanted sexual advances or obscene remarks. But the recent string of media scandals range from lewd jokes to groping to physical assault and rape. The severity of the offense doesn't seem to matter.
It doesn't have to be high level for women to feel under siege. And actually for women, if you're constantly being harassed, even in a small way, that builds up. And that wears you down.
Some scandals involve one accuser. Others involve more than 80 testimonies. Some men have confirmed the allegations. Most have denied them. So when it comes to holding people to account, are we in danger of treating bad manners and sexual violence the same? Without proper investigation, some of the more serious accusations have created concern about the possibility of vigilante-driven trials by the media. This pattern could undermine the legal principle of innocent until proven guilty. There are questions, too, about whether any real action will spread beyond Western society. In parts of the world where the quest for female empowerment and legal protection will be a much longer battle still. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New York is Stephanie Gutman. She's a journalist and blogger who has written about political correctness. And from Washington, Soraya Chemali. She's a writer and activist whose work focuses on the role of gender in culture. I thank you both for joining us. Soraya, let me begin with you. Me Too has exploded onto the scene. It's extraordinary. The cat's out the bag. Has it been a long time coming? And is it a good thing?
So I think Me Too is the culmination and one more movement in a long process of what people think of as hashtag activism that actually has very deep roots on the ground. So I do think it's a good thing. I don't think that it's a necessarily new thing to people who've been doing this work. The hashtag was started many years ago by a woman named Tarana Burke in a different context, but with the same emphasis. And so we have Yes All Women, we have Not Okay, we have many other steps in the process of getting here.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie Gutman, you've written about this. You're not too keen on the Me Too hashtag. Tell us why.
It's too broadly defined. The severity of the charges don't seem to matter, and very little fish are being scooped up with a few big fish.
Interesting. Okay, so let's ask
Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah. Okay, let's ask Soraya about that, right? So you have this principle. A lot of people say there is a problem, but on the one hand, you have sexual harassment, which, as bad as it is being maybe conflated with violent rape, all under the same hashtag, and that can't help anyone. Is there some truth to that, Soraya?
So I think we're mixing a lot of apples and oranges. There are the legal issues, the social issues, the cultural issues. This is a hashtag that is meant to shed light on behavior that has for decades hurt and inhibited many people. And I think we need to categorize it for what it is, which is not a law situation, not an HR situation. The hashtag was started online as a way for women who have always culturally, historically been silenced in the face of these kinds of abuses to share their stories en masse. Because one woman standing alone and saying that these things happen is never enough in our culture. It takes dozens, hundreds of women saying the same thing to be able to confront the word of one man in these situations. So I think that we need to be very specific about that. As far as quote-unquote innocent people being caught up, I think we have to be very careful about using that word. For decades, very talented, very ambitious people have lost opportunities, lost jobs. We as a culture have lost their work, and nobody really pays much attention to that. So I agree that we need to be cautious as to the kinds of inhibitions that result in the workplace from abuses, but I don't think we've gone nearly far enough to appreciate the way that these kinds of abusive behaviors trade in the continuum of behavior that Stephanie talked about.
Okay, so Stephanie, why can't we deal with both at the same time?
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So Stephanie, why can't we deal with both at the same time? With the stuff that is maybe creepy and distasteful at best, and the stuff that is, you know, properly rape on the other, why can't we say, hey, we want to solve all of it at the same time and be able to categorize as adults? Why not?
Because they're radically different. And anyway, we have criminal laws governing rape and battery and actual assault, but we get in big trouble when we start criminalizing and using criminal language around the kind of misunderstandings that occur between men and women in the workplace and outside of the workplace. We just lost one of our best journalists, Glenn Thrush.
So that might be Glenn's situation. Soraya, what Stephanie's saying is that we're casting a really wide net and it might be a witch hunt. Why aren't existing laws against rape and harassment enough, I guess?
In the case of Glenn Thrush, there was not just one incident, is my understanding. There were several. And while some of them may appear to be nuanced, the fact is that it was a systemic pattern of behavior, and that women in these spaces, not just at the New York Times, but at the New Republic or at NPR or any of these other media outlets that have been named, have repeatedly described the need to have whisper networks and to warn each other about the behavior of men, and to understand quite clearly that their professional lives were being imperiled in situations where they had very little control. And so when we talk about the loss of work or the loss of income or people supporting their families, we need to remember that women are doing all of those things. They're experiencing all of those things, but they're experiencing them in settings, certainly corporate settings, where men, overwhelmingly white men, make up between 83% and 93% of corporate executives, managers, newsroom editors. So, you know, to compare what happens to a person in a bar where they're out socializing with what happens to a person in the workplace where these types of power dynamics are diffuse is really not fair. These are totally different things happening. And so if we are uncomfortable with what is happening right now to men who are being named for their egregious behavior, then what we need to think about is how we fail to provide systems and procedures, which gets us to the law. In this country, only 3% of rapists ever see the inside of a jail. In more than 50% of states, they're allowed to sue for custody of children. The law fails rape victims, male and female, every single day, 24 hours a day. So falling back on laws that are already faulty is really not going to help us in these situations either.
Okay, so Stephanie, we have to...
need a soup-to-nuts discussion about sexual ethics and its relationship to male power.
Okay, so Stephanie, we need to fix a culture more than we need to fix laws, which is harder.
I think, if anything, our culture has veered way over to an extreme of people defining themselves as victims and defining minor slights as, you know, major injury. If anything's wrong with our culture right now in the U.S., that is the problem, you know, an excessive sensitivity, an excessive, you know, sort of determination to be offended. And I think, you know, as a culture, we need to lighten up quite a bit. You know, this is sort of the ultimate white people's problem. I mean, all of this shrieking about, you know, being taken out to lunch by your boss and him trying to make a date with you. You know, is that really something that's going to scar you for life? If so, you're way too sensitive to be in the workplace to begin with. That's the problem in this culture.
Soraya?
So I think that there's a basic disconnect, obviously, between our worldviews. I think women should be allowed to work unmolested. And if men can't go to lunch with them without asking them out to lunch, then they should maybe not be in the workplace. I mean, we need to reverse the trajectory of the situation if all we think we're talking about is oversensitivity. We're talking about people's physical safety. 1/3 of women who report harassment say that they fear for their physical safety. We're talking about people's ability to earn a living. Over 40% of households are now headed by women in the workplace. We're talking about the ability to be successful at work. We know what these hierarchies look like. We know that we don't have workplaces that welcome parents, men or women. We know that we don't have workplaces that welcome women as leaders. That much is clear from the facts. Congress is 83% male. Corporate America is between 83 and 93% male. These aren't oversensitivities we're talking about. We're talking about harassment, bias, discrimination, and yes, they exist on a spectrum. All things are not equal.
Stephanie, let me ask you, if we come out of this, right, come out of this moment, and we see that the courts and employers tend to take harassment and sexual assault a bit more seriously, men who would normally be a bit creepy are less creepy, what's the downside?
Well, first of all, I think that the courts and society as a whole has been taking sexual harassment very seriously for a long, long time. I really don't recognize the world that Soraya describes. It's almost like something from the 50s, and it's certainly not the America that I know and have worked in for, you know, a long time. I studied the military. I wrote a book about the military. If anything, the military is now oversensitive about sexual harassment. It defines sexual harassment in some of its training manuals as glances that last longer than 3 seconds. It defines sexual harassment as, you know, it can include jokes, can include all sorts of things. Now, I think that's a little extreme of a definition, and certainly women in the military are encouraged, and, you know, there's all kinds of infrastructure to encourage them to report and to try these things. So I don't think we need at this point to add any more.
So let's ask Soraya. Yeah. Soraya, this is not Mad Men in the 1950s. It's a different world. There are laws and there are sensitivities. And Stephanie feels that there's an exaggeration of a system that by and large works. It might be unfair, there might be anecdotally problems, but by and large it works, and you want to try and change it. Why?
I don't really think it's working for the majority of people. I mean, I've rattled off a whole lot of descriptions of what our institutions look like. And I don't think that institutions that are so profoundly lacking in diversity in their leadership are working for the majority of Americans. I don't think that institutions that systemically inhibit women from accomplishing their ambitions and from serving in full capacities, in professional capacities, are serving the needs of most people. I don't think that legal systems that exonerate 97% of people who are charged with rape are working. I don't think that living in a society where between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women are battered, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted, 1 in 6 women are stalked, I don't really think that's working for most of American society.
Okay, so Stephanie, I know sometimes sampling the noise on Twitter, you get the feeling as if it's a lynch mob, and I get it. I mean, I go onto Twitter, and it does seem like that on a multitude of issues. But sort of tuning out the noise for a second, and given that this kind of, we're in the heat of the moment, right? Down the line, isn't it a good thing if something chips away at anybody's abuse of power, whether a man or a woman, something hangs a question mark over anybody potentially abusing their position of power? What can be bad about that?
There's nothing bad about that, and that's great. And if, this whole thing, reminds people to be courteous and civil in the workplace, that's a great thing. I don't know, I've been in the workplace a long time, and this whole idea of early childhood education sounds very totalitarian to me. I mean, we have early childhood education. If our primary schools work correctly, children are socialized to be, good and respectful people. I don't know we need anything sort of gender specific or gender based. If anything in this country, little boys are being sort of systematically beat up. A woman named Christina Hoff Sommers wrote a really brilliant book called The War on Boys. And I think that we need to correct a pendulum that swung way too far in the direction of sort of telling little girls that they're great, and and stop punishing little boys and stop punishing men. I know that men in 2017 feel very, very beat up. I think it's one of the qualities that influence the Trump vote. A lot of men just felt aggrieved. A lot of white men feel that they sort of are taking the heat for stuff that they shouldn't be taking the heat for.
Okay, so let me get a final response, because I've got to wrap and I've got to move on. Final response from Soraya. In trying to address problems of the patriarchy, are we finding, I don't know, are we flipping it? Are we flipping it and maybe creating unfairness on the other side, as Stephanie is alleging?
I think that we need to be specific. In the United States, because we have a very diverse community, population, we can't really talk about the patriarchy without talking about white male supremacy in this context, right? Those two things mutually construct each other, the sexism and the racism. I don't think that we have any pendulum swinging anytime soon in the direction of altering this power structure. I think it will take a very long time. Patriarchy also hurts the dispossessed, whether they're male or female. It hurts poor men the way it hurts poor women. But power accrues almost universally to elite men. And in this country, that means elite white men. And I don't really think there's any doubt that that is the case. Yes, we have our Melissa Mayers, but there are more men named John, more men named Dick, more men named William than there are all women CEOs in the United States. And to highlight 1 or 2 women who are overrepresented in media is only to try and deny the facts on the ground that there are so few women in leadership in any sector of our economy. That's not really a matter of opinion. That's just the fact of the way we're organized. I do think boys are hurt by norms of masculinity in our country. I think that they are aggrieved and have reason to feel great distress. But that does not mean that they do not get paid more or that they don't benefit from the biases that result in the kinds of long-term power imbalances that we see. I also think that the effort to address any of these problems really does have to happen in early childhood education. I don't think our early childhood education is providing enough guidance in these ways.
Okay, Soraya and Stephanie, I've got to move on, but I thank you both for your patience and for joining us here on the Newsmakers. You came at it from different frames of reference, but I think it was important to have the conversation. Thank you very much for joining us.